Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics Overtime. We are here minutes after the verdict in the Shockley case came down in the city of St. Louis. For those of our outstate viewers that may not know, it is a case where a police officer shot a man back in 2011 that was charged with first-degree murder. The verdict was released this morning at 9. That came back that the verdict was not guilty. The officer was acquitted. There's been a lot of talk of unrestrained outrage. Even the clergy has made some pretty aggressive comments about this. I want to ask you, John Gaskin, you're an NAACP board member, one of the most plugged-in people in St. Louis County. Explain to me where the outrage in this community comes from. Explain it to me like I'm a person watching this in Sedalia that want to know what happened with this case and what is the focal point of the outrage we're going to see today.
Sure. Really, the focal point of it is you have a community, an African-American community, people of color, are really exhausted from being treated unfairly in our criminal justice system. The fact of the matter is, whether you're a Republican or Democrat or you live in Springfield, Sedalia, or St. Louis, the reality is African Americans and people of color are disproportionately discriminated against in our criminal justice system. You have a system right now where, with this particular case, there are questions whether a gun was planted on this gentleman in that vehicle. There are many questions saying, asking, did this officer, was he within his rights to shoot this gentleman if he was unarmed? And so there are so many questions. The biggest outrage is what people believe is the lack of transparency. People of color, I'm just going to say it, have a real issue trusting law enforcement and have a real issue trusting the criminal justice system.
Let me ask you a question. Is it your experience that it's a St. Louis and Kansas City thing, or do you feel like an African American living in, let's say, Rolla today has the same mistrust? Is it universal?
Absolutely. Whether you're in Brooklyn, New York, or you're in Brooklyn, Illinois, the reality is
Do you believe that is warranted?
Yes, I do. When you take a look at, for example, here in Missouri, our racial profiling statistics, which are released, which obviously was much of the work of Governor Carnahan, the NAACP worked to have that bill passed. You look at those statistics and you see how disproportionately African Americans are stopped in our state. The statistics don't lie. They could potentially be worse. When you look at the number of hate crimes that are occurring in our state right now, there is some legitimate concern to be concerned about your safety, especially as it relates to being stopped.
Can I ask you a personal question?
Sure, of course.
If you're driving down a Missouri road and late at night and you see the blue lights flash, is there a moment of fear that hits you? Do you
Absolutely.
feel
I'll give you a key example.
You're a professional,
Sure.
working Clayton, one of the leading citizens in St. Louis County, one of the top young professionals that I know, regardless of race. You feel an element of fear when you deal with law enforcement?
Absolutely. Just the other day, I was stopped right in St. Louis County in Maryland Heights, driving a loaner from Elko Cadillac. And I was stopped, and I admit I was speeding. The first question the officer asked me, it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, is this your vehicle? First thing he asked me. And two, have you been drinking tonight? And proceeded to ask me to get out of the car and do field sobriety tests.
Now, I think as a white guy in a similar age, I get asked the drinking part, but
Sure.
I don't get asked what's my car.
Yeah, and so
That I recall.
And Scott, I think you're a very pragmatic person.
Yeah.
But it's to get, I get that every time I get pulled over, is this your vehicle? And I drive a nice car. And so it is the assumption, oftentimes, or that this vehicle is stolen. Or this isn't your vehicle.
If you're watching this right now and you're a person in Trenton, Missouri, and you say, well, the due process went forward, the legal process unfolded, and the guy was found not guilty. If he was found guilty, there'd be praise, and not guilty, there isn't that just our process? Why are people mad if the process unfolded?
Sure. So there's one thing I don't agree with and like Kim Gardner, who did a great job with this case, she worked with what she had to work with in her office entirely.
Was first-degree murder too heavy of a charge?
Yeah, so she had to deal with this case that she was given. But Scott, here's where I am. I am not happy with the verdict, but I accept the process. And the reality is elections have consequences, Scott. And if we want the standard, use of force standard changed here in Missouri, we have got to elect people to go to the legislature and change it.
What's the one thing somebody should know in outstate Missouri that explains what's going to happen, what is happening in St. Louis right now, and the anger about this verdict, what should they know? What's the one thing I could leave somebody with that like myself, who I think I consider myself a well-meaning person.
Sure.
I want to understand why this is happening. Can you give me just one, as short as you can, explanation as why it's happening?
People, African Americans and people of color, do not trust law enforcement, and they do not trust the criminal justice system. And that's, I'd hope that people in outstate Missouri, they may not agree with that, but hopefully they can be empathetic and place themselves in the shoes of a black man. Just for 1 second, understand, I could see that. I can understand where they're coming from.
John Gaskin, thank you so much for sharing.
Thanks for having me, as always, Scott.
I always learn a lot when we talk. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you.
We'll see you next week on This Week
Absolutely.
in Missouri Politics.